Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Brewery Underground podcast. Yes, I'm Steve Sullivan, and I am joined again this week by the Chancellor of Craft Beer. He will be Scott Turon. Before we get to Scott, we want to say make sure you follow us at Sullivan Turon BreweryAdventures.com, and also you can find us, our podcast now. We are out there, Scott. We are out there on Spotify, so it's
Yeah,
always an exciting time. So, man, how are you? What's going on?
doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastically well, and I am really, really excited today because we are going to get right into this. From my hometown of Cincinnati, we have probably one of my most favorite breweries that we're going to be featuring on this podcast, and we have with us Chris Shields from Rhinegeist Brewery. And Chris, thank you for joining us today, man.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Well, we are looking forward to talking to you all about everything Rhinegeist. And we do want to mention that we have allotted a lot of time for this podcast. So this is actually going to be a two-parter. So we'll have part one, and then we'll announce when part two is coming on. So we want to do that. But how are things in Cincinnati today? As we're talking to you.
Things are going pretty well. It's actually a beautiful day, which is a nice change. It's bright and sunny. It's like in the 70s. I was just outside with the pup sitting on the back deck having a snack, and yeah, I mean it's something about this time of year. I think well, and I mean we're coming up on opening day, which is
Yes.
much bigger deal here in Cincinnati than most of the rest of the country. But
People can't see this, but I got my red shirt on right now.
yeah,
So
yeah. So we're that's always kind of like I feel like we're making it into spring, and that's exciting.
Yeah,
We
you get
are.
those
We
cool
are.
mornings, right? You get those cool mornings, and it warms
Yeah.
up. It was 75 here today too, so it was very nice.
Well, I think ironically, all of us seem to be drinking Rhinegeist. We always start out this podcast opening up a beer, and I think because we were chatting earlier, we've all opened one up, and you guys kind of showed me what you're drinking, and you're drinking, Chris, you're drinking the Cincinnati, the Cincy Light, is that right?
Yeah, I've got a Cincy Light here. That one's not open yet. That's my second beer. Um,
Okay.
I'm currently drinking that Gasoline Dreams from Monday Night Brewing. Um,
All right.
since I was, as I mentioned, I've got some great friends down there, and was just visiting with them, and got myself an IPA here, and it's their New Zealand style, pale ale, I guess, and enjoying that. So figure I'd, go with the hazy hoppy and then switch over to light and bright.
Absolutely, and
Awesome.
I see you've got it in the Rhinegeist glass though, so
Oh, of course, you got to have the branded glassware.
love it. I've got as a matter of fact, before we started, I've got a truth in my hand, and I realized that since this was going to take a little extra time than we normally do, I ran down and got a cheetah as well. So if you hear a second beer open during this podcast, it's the cheetah. I'm going to start with the truth. There you go.
So I didn't tell you guys beforehand what I have, but this is Rhinegeist. It is Cave Bear, and it's a IPA. I'm sure you're familiar with it. I had picked this up when I was up there last back in December at the party source on my way back. I had picked that up, and so because I'm kind of the designated driver of this podcast, and I think this thing is like an 8%, 8.5. Um, this will probably be my one beer during this time, so I can keep us on track a little bit. But yeah, this is going to be fun. So, Chris, you are the director of education for Rhinegeist, and that has to be an interesting role because I'm sure people are like, okay, educate us. What exactly does all that mean?
Yeah, it's funny. People that are inside the industry often, will just ask like, "Well, what does that mean? Like, what are you doing?" And then when I tell people outside the industry, they kind of ask the same question. But uh, just because it's not necessarily super common for breweries to have a dedicated role. Um, I, I I'm a staunch advocate of every brewery, whether they're formalizing it or not, is is doing education. You know, it may be in different forms, and it's probably people from a lot of different departments or jobs that are doing that. I think it's one of the great things about craft in general is, you can walk into somewhere and ask the bartender a question and they're going to tell you about the beer, or you're at an event and you meet somebody and you're chatting, or you're the brewer and you're telling your bar team what the next beer coming out is all about. So I do a little bit of some of that stuff. The shortest way that I've found to kind of describe what I do day to day is my background's on the production side. So I have that experience. And now I arguably sit closer to the sales, marketing, front of house side of things. So really what I'm doing is kind of translating back and forth between kind of the production side of everything we do and the sales and marketing side of everything we do. And at Rhinegeist, that's a lot. And it absolutely is both ways. And that's been a really fun way for me to just, one, get to work with a ton of different people and have a ton of different projects. And, I certainly do things like teach, trainings and classes and things like that. But it's definitely not sort of all day, every day. Because I've had that question too of like, do you just sit like in a classroom and give lectures about beer like 40 hours a week? And I was like, I know a lot about beer. I don't know if I know that much about beer. But yeah, so it's really kind of a, I'm a little bit of a go-between, because, y'all understand, like there's, if you're talking to somebody who's a production brewer, they're going to use different language and have a different perspective than somebody who's a, sales director or bar manager or, a marketing designer or something like that. So trying to make sure that we're telling our story internally in a smart way, so that when we tell our story externally, whether it's me doing it or not, there's some consistency and some verification and consistency and all those sorts of tagline words, but keeps me busy.
One thing I was curious about as I was thinking, like, what are we going to ask you today? And we have tons and tons of questions. And after I got through writing out about 20 questions, there was one that just popped into my head that should be obvious. How did Rhinegeist get its name?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like it because it's a question that I had, right? I joined Rhinegeist a while ago, but it was already, I wasn't there from the beginning. And I also joined Rhinegeist at a time when I had just moved to Cincinnati. So it was basically the answer to that question kind of really helped me understand a little bit more about Cincinnati and the neighborhood where our brewery is, which is called Over the Rhine, or OTR. We are actually in an old pre-Prohibition era building. Two buildings really that are smashed together at this point, but they were part of the Christian Moorline Brewing operation, which was like 3 city blocks worth of OTR. And OTR was a bunch of breweries, 20 or 25 breweries in Cincinnati before Prohibition, many of them in that same part of downtown. And the reason that part of downtown was called OTR, or Over the Rhine, is that for anybody that's been to or is familiar with Cincinnati, Central Parkway was a canal.
Yep.
We had canals connecting the Great Lakes to the Ohio River and various other places to make sure that that was the trucking system of the day, is everything rode on barges through the rivers. So in order to get from the main part of downtown Cincinnati, the central business district, if you will, which is right on the river, you had to cross the canal to get up into this other neighborhood. And this other neighborhood was a even more German influenced part of a very German city. Cincinnati has a ton of German heritage, and OTR as a neighborhood was even more concentrated. they had German language schools and newspapers in the neighborhood because so many of the population were recent immigrants from Germany coming to work. And the three main things that happened in OTR was pork processing, wrought iron, manufacturing and construction, and brewing. Those were all things that these German immigrants could come and they would bring their families and they would find work. And so the joke became, to get into this neighborhood, you had to go over the Rhine or over the canal, because as a sort of joke about the Rhine River in Germany, it was like you were stepping into Germany. So our neighborhood has this huge history of German brewing. And we wanted, or I say we, I wasn't there when this plan was hatched, but our founders and what they wanted to do, Bob and Bryant, is while they wanted to bring a brewery back to this neighborhood, and they didn't want to bring a sort of traditional German style brewery. They wanted a modern brewery. But if you think about it, those breweries that we're talking about, they were modern, technologically advanced breweries of the time.
Exactly.
They were brewing, they were brewing American lager and with the German tradition and German lager and using the best of technique and technology that they could. So that was the attitude that our Bob and Bryant took when founding Rhinegeist, was to say, let's honor that entrepreneurial spirit, that community connection, that feeling of bringing a brewery and bringing jobs and a life back to OTR, but do it in that same modern way. So our logo, if you're familiar, that skull drop, it's supposed to be a drop, a little bit of history in every drop of beer. So that's kind of the idea of a Rhine being a nod to both our name and the German heritage of the neighborhood. And then Geist is German for ghost or spirit. So there's sort of a double meaning there. So you've got the spirit of the Rhine, the sort of the history, that ghost part, but also, spirit is alcohol. So it kind of works both ways there. But that's really just kind of, I would say that the early days, the biggest question I got when I was like at a conference or visiting back home or something, like, oh, Rhinegeist, do you guys make, only German Pilsner or, exclusively German lagers? And I was like, no, but we're in a building that used to do that. And in a neighborhood that used to do that, in a city that used to do that. So, and I think we still, we do make some of those styles, and I think we do a good job. But they're, they don't move off the shelves the way that some of the other things we make do.
Being from there, I think it's interesting because over the years, and this is probably going back, 10, 11 years or whatever, and you started to hear, and I know I did, over the Rhine, over the Rhine, over the Rhine. I'm like, over the Rhine, because, when I was growing up there, over the Rhine was a different area. It wasn't really a place that had breweries or places you went. And it's become so revitalized. And I think it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, at least, was the first time that I stepped foot in Rhinegeist. And I'm like, wow, this whole area has changed quite a bit. And I feel like you guys have really been a big part of the revitalization in that entire area.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been at Rhinegeist for 9 years, and just the amount of change even in that time has been significant. We certainly weren't the first, business down in that area. Really, it was restaurants and some bars that kind of started. You've got places like, Senate or the Eagle and Lackman and some of these other places, Japs, and these bars that have a long history, a recently long history in OTR, to kind of bring people back. And now it's this, there's, as you said, there were, people would say like, well, I never went to OTR because there was nothing there. I mean, our building was vacant when we moved in, and that it was not uncommon. And there just was. I think it's really neat that, and I may get the specifics of this fun fact slightly wrong, but I believe OTR, that part of Cincinnati, has the most dense concentration of historic buildings, like kind of in a contiguous neighborhood of anywhere in the country.
Wow.
I would have thought Charleston or
Yeah.
New Orleans or right, but it's basically because nothing was taken down, because there wasn't any reason to take anything down to build something else. So basically every building in OTR is, from the 1800s or early 1900s. Not all, and certainly there's been new construction over the last 10 years, but for a long time there just wasn't much being built. And it's been a fascinating just experience to see the changes that have happened in the neighborhood, and I hope most of them good. There's certainly anytime, I mean, heck, you guys are in Nashville, there that there can be some challenges with growth and expansion, but I believe there's still fewer people living in downtown Cincinnati than there were pre-prohibition. We're really kind of we're kind of a small big city, or a big small city, or I don't know however you want to slice it, but you get that balance of, we have these beautiful old buildings. Our music hall is, I think, one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen. It's just this marvelous building right on a park, right in OTR. But then you can still walk around and run into people, and I think that's really attractive for the city. And I think recently I've started to see more and more things of like, best place to, best city to start a family in the Midwest, and things like that, popping up on these lists, and, cool place for young professionals to move and get a job. We have some, some other startups beyond Rhinegeist, like little companies like Procter and Gamble and GE, and, some of these other, whippersnappers that are trying to make their mark, but
trying to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that they'll be able to make it work. But it's cool to have both that balance of history and some modernization and some growth and revitalization. There's, I'm almost the old guy at the brewery, just with the way that a lot, craft breweries are definitely attract, a lot of young people to come work. And we have a lot of folks that live downtown, or live, just over the river in northern Kentucky, and live in Covington, live in Newport. They're a lot of Xavier grads or UC grads or NKU grads, and they just kind of stick around, and they're plugged into the lifeblood of Cincinnati. And I think that's a really cool aspect, whether they're born and raised, and whether. The nice thing about OTR is it's neither east side nor west side. We're right in the middle. We can be a safe space for everyone. And
right.
Or people that maybe, we have a lot of people that maybe moved to Cincinnati for school, for college, and then just stayed. A lot of people kind of go to school and then leave, or they go to school. Like, I went to school relatively close to where I grew up, and then stayed for a while and then left. But you get this, you get people that are starting their life. The neighborhood I live in has, I've got neighbors that have been in their house for 40 years, and I've got, brand new neighbors that moved in last year and have a little baby. It's that kind of, that mix, which I think is a fun part of the city.
Yeah, we're a lot that way here. If you build it, they will come, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The downtown area, the Gulch, as we have here, new things get built, younger people move in, more condos, more apartments.
Yeah.
And
Station Inn's still there, right? In the Gulch, they haven't. They're not getting
Station
rid of
Inn?
Station Inn, I hope.
I don't know. You know where that is,
That
Steve?
was
I
I
don't know.
know of it, but honestly, there's so much that changes
I
down
don't
there.
know.
I couldn't swear to it without looking it up. A station that is still there.
yeah. Last time I was down there, I don't know, maybe it was a year ago or so, it was still there. So, but that's always what I think of when I think of the Gulch, because it was, I came to Nashville for a visit I'm from North Carolina, as I said, and it was in 2008, and we went to the Station Inn. It's like a little bluegrass venue, and there was nothing near it.
Yeah.
And I went to try to find it a couple years ago, and I was like, I'm not even in the right place. And then I was. It was just everything else around it was totally different.
Yeah, kind of all that was there at one time was Yazoo was there before they moved to Madison. They moved north.
Yep.
That was like their second location. And then things started. That got bought. Some hotels got put in right there, and you go down there now, and it's just there's new construction. You think, how can they put something else in this little plot of land? But somehow they seem to find a way. High wire. We got a high wire down there now, which is kind of cool. You guys have one that's pretty new.
Yeah, we got one. That's a North Carolina brand. That's
yes.
Yeah.
Remember those guys getting started.
Yep.
We went there last year, and it had just opened up. The one in Norwood, and coming back in a couple of months, and gonna hit Rhinegeist, of course, but also looking forward to hitting a lot of others.
That's something you guys have up there more than we do as far as breweries with rooftops. Now, downtown Nashville, every bar down there's got got a rooftop. And if you don't have a rooftop, you're out of business. Or you're never going to make it. But the breweries don't. We don't have one brewery here that does. But it's a Cincinnati thing. I mean, Braxton, you guys, obviously High Wire, there may be some others, but those are the ones we know.
Brew Dog, yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Hey, let's talk about the rooftop, by the way, and really talk about what your brewery, what Rhinegeist looks like for maybe people that have never been there, because I feel like the rooftop is really one of the big selling points for Rhinegeist. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Oh yeah, I mean we are approaching rooftop season, and we're at the stage where employees are starting to sneak up there with their laptops and maybe take a couple meetings and finish out their day when the weather's nice. Yeah, the rooftop has been really fantastic for us. It was something that we didn't have initially. It was kind of part of when we eventually, when we got our private event spaces kind of decked out and renovated and upfit, we also put in the rooftop, and that's what gave us access, honestly, to the roof easier. We put in a second. There was a roof access, but then we put in a second stairwell with an elevator, and that was, as we were doing some work on the building, we wanted to put in an elevator. To give us a little bit more access for folks that maybe don't want to go up a bunch of stairs. And that allowed us to really put some thought into the roof. And we put it's nothing fancy, really. I mean, it's nice, but it's just, I always say it's the best. I think it's the best rooftop view in Cincinnati. Now, I may be biased, but I like it because it looks at downtown. We're not among the really tall buildings of downtown. We're out a little ways in OTR, and so you can stand on our rooftop. We're up the hill just a little bit, and you can see, the Great American Building, and then the P&G Towers and Carew Tower, and all these really cool buildings, and there's several rooftops on hotels or in some of the condos and things downtown, but you're right in it. You're right in the mix, and you don't get that vista sort of view. And for folks not familiar, Cincinnati kind of sits in a bowl. We've got kind of hills surrounding us other than the river, and you can really see just kind of the whole city kind of all the way around. And from our rooftop you can see old brewery smokestacks and an ice house and all these old brick buildings. You can see Sam Adams. you can
And
see
I was gonna
downtown.
say that if you don't let me interrupt for a second, I was gonna say that as you were talking about the um the landscape, you can literally stand there and look around and see the history of just in
Yeah.
on that particular block and over the Rhine. It's some of those buildings and they're like, oh my gosh, this is how old this area is and how old these buildings are. I mean, it really is. I think there's some breathtaking views up there. I really do.
Yeah, yeah, I really like it. It's been a really cool part of the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years since it's been open for us. And we try to keep it open as long as we can. It eventually gets a little chilly up there, so we do close it down in the winter. We try to go from Red's opening day, which is late March, to Halloween. We don't always make it to Halloween. Sometimes the weather turns a little early, and actually, this last year we didn't we shut the bar down up there because there's a bar up there. You can get your drinks up there, but we left it open for people to just be able to go up. So you could get a beer. You had to go up, and but you could still hang out. And that's something that I think we did that for the first time this fall, and I think we'll continue to do that because it's relatively easy for us to have one of our door guys up there and just kind of making sure no shenanigans are happening. But beyond that, don't have to staff it with a full bar tenders and things. But if it's nice out, it's a really nice way to, like you said, just enjoy a beer and see the city. And even if it is a little bit cold, you're only up there for a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah. And talk about like the inside space too, because you go in there and I mean, it is wide open and you've got a lot of activities in there, like cornhole, I believe, at times during the year and things like that. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, we've got it's a pretty special space. Those of us that have been at the brewery for a long time, we talk about how fun it is to still be, walking up the steps behind somebody who's never been in the space before. So for listeners who haven't been, first of all, what are you doing? Come visit.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
second of all,
exactly.
where it's not that far. Second of all, we basically you can jump right off the streetcar and start walking in, but you walk in right into a stairwell. We own the building, but we have production activities on the first floor. So the tap room is actually up on the second floor, but these are big floors. So
Yeah.
you walk in and you gotta hit some steps on your way up. And over the years, these steps have just been covered in stickers. I don't know, the stickers might be holding them together at this point. But you walk up these steps, and it's so fun. When if I come in on a Saturday or I'm coming in, I was out running an errand or having a meeting, and I'm coming back in, and we're open, and I'm following somebody up the steps, and we're earning our beer, or I hope it's worth all these steps, and we do have an elevator that people are welcome to use. But you walk up and then you basically go through a regular sized door, and then you're spit out into basically a giant room that's about 25,000 square feet. So it's a really big room with super high ceilings and big skylights. And it's just this, as you said, a big chunk of it is wide open space. There's some production tanks in there. When I first started brewing at Rhinegeist, that's where we were brewing. Those tanks, that brew house, we still use them, but we have additional capacity as well. But it's cool. You feel connected to the brewery. There's beer in those tanks, but like you said, we have cornhole. We've got ping pong tables. We've got any number of other activities, birthday parties, or we used to have a wiffle ball league in there, and inside, which is just sort of we did dodgeball at our all hands meeting last year. So there's really just there's a lot of opportunity to make the space what works for us, and sometimes that's just our big picnic tables that our team of makers made in house, and just let people congregate and have a good time, kind of beer hall style. Sometimes it's a very different event, and that flexibility is really nice because we can we've done some wacky stuff in the tap room Anybody that's been in through the years, we've had all sorts of animals, and the museum center put a 60-foot dinosaur skeleton in there for one summer. That was a blast. As like as a science nerd myself, like watching all these little kids run in and just like lose their mind because there's a giant 60-foot long dinosaur. Like it was a real skeleton, like a dinosaur fossil in our. It was nuts.
How long does something like that take to set up?
A shockingly short amount of time. There is a group. I can't think of their name right now, but that's basically their job. It's this crew, and what they do is they work with museums all over the world. I think they're actually called the Skeleton Crew, which is kind of just like a funny pun. But that's what they do, is when a museum needs something moved, or they're changing their exhibit, these guys show up, they make all their notes, they pack everything up, they move it, they set it back up. It was really cool. This was actually, it's on display now in the Cincinnati Museum Center, which is a fantastic museum. But it was a few years ago, they were doing an expansion to their dinosaur hall where they had all their dinosaurs displayed. This dinosaur was discovered by one of the curators at the museum, but it had never been fully set up and assembled because they didn't have room. So the first time it was ever set up was in our brewery. And like, that was just what a wacky thing. And of course I'm like, oh my God, some kid's going to break it, or adult. Like this is like a priceless fossil, but it had netting in front of it, and people were actually, I mean, honestly, really respectful, because that was the thing. It's like, we can't take it down on Saturday night. It's
All right.
You get some drunk one to climb up the back of it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, the security guards worked extra hard that summer. But
that's great.
But no, but it was really cool. You can probably find some pictures of it in our tap room, but it was that's one of the wilder ones. But we've done all sorts of dance performances and circus things, and I mean, really just a lot of space to play around.
I could remember I literally can remember my first time walking in there, and I probably was aghast. Like, I was like, holy shit. Just because of the sheer size. It's like you said, you walk up behind somebody and you're like, you see them see the place for the first time. You're like, they're playing cornhole inside? Like, it's massive. I mean, I've been to, you guys do the Rare Beer Fest, which I've been to a couple of times, and it's, again, the place is so big, you spread out, you got so many vendors set up in there with tables, and you've got like a VIP area kind of through the doors, and there's like a whole nother upstairs. It's just, it's you got to see it. It's amazing how big this place is.
Every time I go there, when I go to the rooftop, especially if it's a nice day, I don't want to leave. I just want to order more flights and hang out and, get all the beer. It's funny. You mentioned the streetcar, and I'm going to nerd out a little bit on this because this is, I think, the only streetcar in Cincinnati. And I remember a few years ago when they started talking about a streetcar, and I'm like, in Cincinnati, a streetcar? And but I think it does have its use. And it seems like there's been more and more people over the years that have started to use it more, and it takes you around town and down the Great American Ballpark, and things like that. And I think because where you all are, parking isn't always the best in the world, could be a little challenging. So do you see a lot of people using that streetcar down there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the streetcar, it's been a few years. It's kind of gotten it established, and as you said, it's kind of found its footing a little bit. I think one thing that was really powerful and was really great for the city to come together with the streetcar and some other organizations is that it's fare free now. It never was terribly expensive. It was like $1 for a 2-hour pass or something like that, or $2 for a day, right? It wasn't extremely expensive, but as you guys know, like, sometimes just the dealing with that is maybe enough to just have somebody do something else. And so now it's nice to be able, I mean, we have staff that take it to work, they hop on it, and they'll be running out the office like, oh, I'm trying to catch the streetcar, I'll see you guys tomorrow. It kind of runs a loop, and it's not a huge loop. I would love it if it, expanded. But it goes basically all the way from the river up to us, which is, it is walkable, but it's a long walk.
It is.
You're talking,
From
a couple miles
yeah.
or something like that, all said and done. The
Yeah.
loop hits some other spots. So it really is a great way to just kind of jump in. It stops at Findlay Market. It stops at the main library. It stops at the the Aronoff Center where you can, plays and performances happen. And it stops down by, the Banks, which is all surrounding the Red State, the Great American Ballpark. And, it stops, it's not too far from the Bengals Stadium. It's not too far from the FC Cincinnati Stadium. The FC Cincinnati TQL Stadium didn't exist when the streetcar was put in. So that's, maybe one of the hurdles, but it allows people to find a spot downtown to park and explore for the day. Because that, I think, is one, that's how a lot of the parking works downtown, especially on the weekend. You can get a spot for all day for a flat rate. And I would say parking can be tough in any particular, exact area, but I've never struggled to find a spot, right? So it's like you might be a couple blocks away from where you want to go, but if you're hopping on the streetcar, it's easy. And just like anybody, I'm sure you guys probably have your secret spots, your honey holes around town.
Usually it's called Uber.
Yeah.
Usually, well, when we go, usually to Rhinegeist it's Uber, and then you talk about in Nashville, and Scott can talk about this too, because Nashville, it really depends. I mean, I Uber a lot because I live a little south of Nashville, but Nashville could be I think Nashville traffic is far worse than Cincinnati, in my opinion. But
yeah, it's really not. I mean, you get we've got two interstates that kind of come together in the city, so. If you're on the east side, you're going up 71. If you're on the west side, you're going up 75. Splits the load a little bit, I think, for our traffic. And again, it's just not a huge downtown. It's. I mean, Steve, you probably know. Like the joke is, how far away is that? 15 minutes. Like everything in Cincinnati is 15 minutes away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really not that bad. You guys opened, so Rhinegeist opened in 2013, and I know you weren't there from the very beginning, but since you have been there, can you really talk about the growth and just what you have seen change in that time at Rhinegeist?
Yeah. So I started in March of 2015, so 9 years ago, and the brewery was about 18 months old at that time. The Rhinegeist opened end of June 2013, and from June to December, that first 6 months or so, or July, I guess, basically, did about 2,000 barrels of production, and that was more than we expected. And also, the original plan was to just have a very small taproom area, and most of that. What is now the tap room was planned for production. You guys that have been to the brewery, that little kind of alcove by the bar, that was originally the whole tap room, and everything else was going to be, production space. And it was going to be, still relatively open and connected, but it was just when we first opened, people showed up. Cincinnati showed up to hang out and have a beer, and the cornhole, probably the first cornhole board somebody hauled in there. I don't know that for sure, but that's the kind of, that was the kind of thing. People bring their picnics and they bring their, their birthday parties and things like that, because we have a big space. And so that was that first 6 months. And then the next year, which would have been the year of 2014, made about 10,000 barrels. So, 5 times what we made in that first 6 months made in the next, 12. And then the growth really just continued from there. I think we were fortunate with, first off, I believe our beer is excellent, and it always has been. Jim Matt, who was our founding head brewer. He's now our chief science officer. He has always had a strong eye towards quality. He's a chemist by trade, and he takes our lab very seriously and quality very seriously, and has since day one. So our beer is consistent and is of high quality. But we also, there weren't a lot of other breweries downtown. There weren't a ton of other breweries in Cincinnati. There were some. I think we were the 12th brewery to open in Cincinnati, craft brewery. And a lot of the other ones were a little bit smaller or a little bit outside of town. So we kind of had this opportunity to bring people downtown. They're coming down for a Reds game or the Bengals game, and they can pop into the brewery and have a beer. And we had a ton of space. And when I joined in early 2015, we did about 30,000 barrels. And so we tripled. And then we did about 55, and then we did 85, and then we did 100. Took us about 5 years to get to 100,000 barrels, which is ludicrous.
Amazing.
But amazing and awesome in all the definitions of those words. I think one thing that was really worked out well for Rhinegeist is after 2018, when we broke 100,000 barrels, we kind of purposefully hit the brakes a little bit. Not fully, but we realized we can't keep this pace of growth. We need to build and improve some of our SOPs and really plan out our preventive maintenance and develop some best practices, and really refine some of these things that we're doing. And I don't mean to say that we were just, making things up as we went. We had a lot of really, people smarter than me working on these things. Our director of operations, Cole Hackbarth, he came from, a brewing degree out of Oregon State, and spent time at Full Sail and Golden Road and several other big breweries. He was part of Golden Road when they were a first startup, when they were on their rocket ship of growth. So he'd kind of seen some of those things before, and that was a huge advantage for us. So we were cranking beer out, but I think that helped position us for sort of the second 5.5 years or so of our tenure, especially given what happened not too long after that. But we went from right at 100,000 barrels to 106,000 barrels the next year. So we really, slowed way down, and then slowed down a little more from COVID. But we just 2023 we did about 109,000 barrels. So we're back over our high point, and on track to grow again, hopefully this year, but in a very sort of managed way, sustainable way. The other thing that we have to be very honest with ourselves about is there's not really room in that brewery for more fermenters. We definitely have room to get more efficient, and we definitely have room to, be more effective with the stainless that we have, but there's a limit. We have a number that we think is the limit, but we don't know. Yeah. It also depends on what that mix is, right? If we only made Truth or only made, one beer, you can make a lot more of that beer. It's just the nature of different beers in different tanks causes, complication to the schedule, yeast management and things like that. Now, we're not going to do that. Our goal is not to just make as much volume of beer out of that building as possible, but it's worth considering those types of conversations of saying, what's important to us? What do we want to do? What do we want to see? And how do we execute that at a high level with high quality in a way that's also keeps us challenged and keeps us excited?
It's very interesting you talk about that, because I actually noticed as I go back to thinking about when I became a really big Rhinegeist guy. And the couple, 4 or 5 times I come up there, and always either I stop in there, or I'll stop at the Kroger or Party Source or Jungle Gyms, because they always have Rhinegeist. And I did notice, probably back in the 2018, 2019, how much production there always was. And I'm like, gosh, every time I come up here, I got to get this. I got to try this, because, 'cause Scott and I are the same way. You want to try different things. And then, as you said, life hit us all in this country shortly after that, and you did notice the slowdown of production. But it sounds like you guys are back on kind of like a decent track of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean that's our plan, and I think one of the things that happened, honestly, is we're not really making fewer beers than we used to. We'll still make over 125 different beers, but I think in 2022 or so, relatively, we had almost 50 canned brands, and for a brewery of our size, that's a lot. These are not small batches. We don't have a labeler for our canning line. They're printed cans, and so they're big batches. And one of the things we're trying to do is focus a little bit, and not to say that we won't make a whole bunch of different stuff, but just in the era of the growth of the industry, and a lot more breweries and a lot more beers and alcoholic beverages and non-alcoholic beverages competing for the same shelf space, grocery and convenience stores and places like you mentioned, the Party Source, Jungle Gym, they've all been fantastic partners with us for our whole lifespan. But at some point, they don't want 40 different cans from us.
Right.
Because they can't sell that many, and it's complicated for them. And that's even more true in areas where we have wholesalers. We're fortunate enough to be able to self-distribute in Cincinnati and Columbus, but all the rest of Ohio, all the other states that we're in, we work with wholesalers. And we do our best to find partners that work for us, and we're very happy with our wholesale partners. But they don't want to manage 125 brands from us every year. They want, that they got 50 breweries in their book. That, you multiply that by 125 each, that's not humanly possible to kind of keep that straight. So we're trying to figure out, truth is always going to be a huge part. I at least in the foreseeable future. I've been in the beer industry long enough to try not to make absolute statements. The brewery I worked for, when I first got in the industry, we were like, we will never can our beer, and then we canned our beer. I mean, it was like, the industry changes. But like Truth and Juicy Truth now, those are the core of our like IPA craft portfolio. We have these Imperial IPAs like Cave Bear and Sabertooth Tiger and Knowledge and Terror Bird is coming out. We've got, but they rotate, but they're within that bracket of kind of, okay, that's the Imperial IPA kind of series. We've got a couple other specialty things, and we've got our Bubbles brand and the couple.
We got to talk about that one. We got to talk about Bubbles.
Yeah, we got to talk about Bubbles.
Not to interrupt, but the cave beer is really good. But we got to talk about Bubbles, because Scott and I have a really funny story about Bubbles. And Scott, I want you to start off, because you know what I'm going to ask you.
If I remember, it started on the rooftop of Rhinegeist.
That happens. It's popular on the roof.
I think I got a flight of something, and Bubbles was in there. And I don't think you would even try it, Steve. Either you tried it and didn't like it, or said, I'm not even trying it at all. Right? Is that where it started?
Yeah, I kind of looked at it and I said, what is that pink?
Because it's kind of pink and bubbly.
And I tasted it and I was like, nah, that's not for me. And, I said, it's Bubbles, okay. And then one of the places that Scott lives nearby, Deep South Growlers here in Nashville, they were having a couple of years ago, they were having a Rhinegeist night there. and we showed up, and one of our friends came, and they bought me a pint of bubbles, and our friend Calvin looked at me and he goes, when the man buys you a beer, you got to drink it. I'm like,
So, yeah.
But the funny thing is, Chris, is that I had read shortly after that, and it was an interview somewhere, and it may have been you quoting or somebody, how popular of a beer that's one of your more popular beers at Rhinegeist. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it really is. It's gone through some changes, and one of them involves us as a brewery kind of eating some crow. So I can tell that story.
Go ahead.
Give the people what they want is us admitting that we made a poor decision. And the way this starts in the Wayback Machine is in late 2015, early 2016, we started making cider as well as beer. We were able to get a wine permit and make hard cider. And it was something that we kind of were fascinated by, and it was a new challenge. Like we needed another challenge when we were in the middle of that crazy growth. But that was kind of our, we screen print our own T-shirts to this day. That's kind of who we are. We have that. We absolutely have that entrepreneurial spirit. Like, well, we can do that. Sometimes to our detriment, but we decided to make cider, and we were looking for something that could be like a one-off, a specialty cider. And we had a bunch of juices, and we were playing around in our tasting lab and trying out different combinations. And what we came up with was like, hey, like this cider that is apple juice fermentation, but then it's back sweetened with peach and cranberry and a little bit of apple juice. And it wasn't, it was sweet compared to like Truth, the main beers that we make, but not nearly as sweet as a lot of the, Smirnoff Ices of the world, right? And we were like, yeah, it's a cider, cool. We learned pretty quickly when we dug into it that the way cider is taxed is complicated, which probably surprises no one, because cider is technically wine. And there are carve-outs for hard cider, but as soon as you start adding fruit that's not apple or pear, it becomes fruit wine and taxed at a much higher rate. And so we were like, crap, we make 6-packs. Like, we want to make 6-packs of this, not 750 milliliter, cork and cage bottles. We're gonna lose money on this thing. Because the tax is 17 times higher. It's much higher. And there are some small producer credits, but we're too big of a company to qualify for those because the majority of our business is beer. And so we decided to make what we called fruited ales, which is really when bubbles took off. These early cider batches, it was gaining some like notoriety, but we were like, we got to fix this because we can't have, this major brand for us be so expensive. And so what we did is because we're brewers at heart, really, is our fruited ales are a co-fermentation. So it's about 60 something percent malt-based fermentation, but it's basically just base malt, right? As simple of a fermentation as we can make. But then in that, as soon as that gets put in the tank, we're adding a whole bunch of apple juice. And so you get this like winey, cidery kind of character along with the beer. And then we back sweeten with fruit. And that means it's fruit beer. As long as there's a bunch of other rules, but the short version is when the majority of your fermentation is malt based, it's a beer. And there's hops and all these other things. So we're like, great, it's a beer. And that's when it really took off and got really popular. And what happened is over the years, it was around for a few years, and it started to decline a little bit. it was like, okay, they've had it. They're, maybe it's the life cycle of the brand. Who knows? But this was also right when, everybody was making, seltzers and RTDs and getting into this space. And we have our cider, but it's a small part of our business. And so we said, well, what if we reformulate these as FMB? So like a flavored malt beverage. So like still taxed as beer, but not really beer. It's a sugar fermentation, but it's not a seltzer. It's still has all this, juice in it, and it's a little bit sweet. And that was, if you recall, the RG Bevs line.
Yeah.
And so we did bubbles in that. We did some other fruit flavors. We did a hard lemonade within that line. And it really just, what we realized, because the other thing we were hoping is that retailers would take this RG Bevs product and put it next to all the hard seltzers and FMBs and separate from the beer. So it gave us a different audience, but what we realized is we don't have, hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on advertising, or really even $1 million. We don't have any millions of dollars to spend on advertising in general, let alone to spend on advertising for RG Bevs. And the beer fans that we had earned through brewing and through Rhinegeist weren't shopping over in that part of the store. And the new people didn't know us. So we had no, all that credibility that we'd gained for quality and consistency. I mean, this is our hypothesis. We don't know for sure, but they never really took off. They sold fine. When people tried them, they liked them. We'd have panels come in and people would enjoy them, but they just didn't take off the way we had hoped, being quite honest. And so actually this year, what we did is we basically brought the old bubbles back, the fruited ales bubbles. When we made it a FMB, we dropped the ABV down to 5% as well. We went back up to the 6.2%. It's basically the bubbles that most people fell in love with is back, and that's been so far good. I mean, it's only been out for a few months, and that's a few months here in Cincy. It takes a little while to percolate out. But that's been something it's really exciting for us. We got a really positive response when we announced it, like on our social media, which is always nice to hear. And it's like, yeah, guys, sorry. Like, I mean, people weren't mad. It was like we went for something right, and it didn't work. And I think, at the end of the day, that's part of innovation. And we learned a whole hell of a lot. We learned how to make these FMBs and things like that. And we still make one. We still make a hard tea, which I actually really like. I didn't think I was going to, but I find myself drinking it pretty regularly. It's called Geist tea. And
right. I've seen it out. I've not had it though. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, if you like tea, my wife's funny. She's like, I don't like it. I'm like, you don't like tea. It tastes like tea.
Yeah.
It's a sugar fermentation with tea extract, like concentrated tea basically, and some lemon and a little bit of sugar. We call it sweet enough. I'm from the South. Sweet tea is the only tea, but if you are used to drinking some of the other really popular hard teas out in the market, it's not as sweet as those, because we felt like there's room for something that's a little bit sweet, but at least for me, more drinkable. I can drink a couple of them and not just be overwhelmingly full or feel like I had too much sugar. But that's something that we're still doing. That we have a regular, like an original, and a half and half that's like more lemon, kind of lemonade hybrid. But we wouldn't have that if we hadn't played around in that space. And that's like kind of my low key, like, it's super hot out, I'm gonna grab a Geist tea.
It's perfect to be coming out again this time of year, right? Especially the bubbles, right? It's starting to warm up.
And what's funny is I find that it's like a palate refresher. It's not that I'm drinking just that. It's like I might have a beer or two, then have a tea, and then go back to beer. And it's a nice, like, it like helps just refresh your palate. It's very different. It's very lightly it doesn't foam. It's very lightly carbonated. Basically just enough bubbles to keep the cans from crushing.
I was gonna say, and then have a bubbles. This concludes part 1 of our interview with Chris Shields of Rhinegeist Brewery in Cincinnati. Part 2 will be coming up soon. You can check our website at SullivanTuranBreweryAdventures.com and our other social media platforms for updates on when part 2 is going to be dropping. For Scott Turon, I'm Steve Sullivan. This has been the Brewery Underground Podcast.